We're just going to open up with our next panel discussion in a moment here. And I wanted to, first of all, just double check. Yeah, that's great. So I wanted to just introduce something really quickly before we get started on our next panel. It's just to say, for those of you who haven't seen this happen, there was recently at the end of January, free bus travel was extended to all children and young people under the age of 22 in Scotland. So this is just another example of where the Scottish Government is using its powers in multiple different ways to make it easier for people to have the flexibility in their own budgets to make choices around the food that they need. So nearly 1 million children and young people in Scotland are eligible for this free bus travel. Already since the scheme opened, 1.6 million journeys have been made using the travel scheme. So it's possible, it's happening in one area. And what our panel is next going to discuss are some of the ways that this kind of approach might be extended even further. So I'm just going to pass back over to Jane, who will introduce our second panel members, and then we will return to our breakout rooms and to discuss some of the interesting questions that were already coming up. Again, if you've got questions for the panel members, please do pop them in the chat, and otherwise over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'm absolutely delighted to be staying with you all for this session, and I will certainly be learning along with you all about the critical role that free transport can play in helping to reduce the cost of living for children and young people and their families. This is all new to me, so please do make sure you take the advantage of asking questions in the chat. If not, I will just monopolise and ask all my questions. So I'd like to ask our panellists, Susie and Vivian, to introduce themselves and their roles to you. Susie, do you want to introduce yourself first, please?
Hi everyone, thanks very much for having me. Really happy to be here. So I'm Susie Murning, I'm the Campaigns Officer at the Poverty Alliance. So the Poverty Alliance is Scotland's national anti-poverty network organisation. And I obviously managing the campaigns, manage the Everyone Aboard campaign, which I'm going to be talking about soon.
Lovely, thanks Susie, looking forward to hearing about that. Vivian, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
My name is Vivian Opiolka. I work at Central and West Integration Network. We are a small charity in the centre of Glasgow. We work with asylum seekers and refugees, and transport is a big topic for the people I work with. And I'm very excited to be on with Susie because I'm excited to hear more about your campaign. This is something that we are kind of involved with a wee bit as well, but we'll touch more on that, I'm very sure, quite soon.
Perfect, thanks. Well, that segues us nicely then, Susie. Can you tell us a little bit about the Everyone Aboard campaign, and why is that such an important thing for us to be rolling out at this moment in time?
Sure. So the Everyone Aboard campaign launched back in March last year, and the campaign calls on the Scottish Government to extend free concessionary bus travel to under 25-year-olds and to all individuals receiving low income benefits. So things like universal credit, working tax credits, Scottish child payment, etc. Because addressing barriers to accessing transport in Scotland is a really vital part of ensuring everyone's human rights can be realised and of combating poverty and inequality generally. And I think linking to what something Chelsea said at the beginning, this policy is something that could help both with the prevention of food insecurity as well as responding to food insecurity when it arises. So if the policy was introduced, it's estimated that it could benefit over 211,000 young people from the ages of 22 to 24. As Chelsea was saying, younger people now already have free bus travel, and almost 699,000 adults on low incomes. So at the Poverty Alliance, like an increasing number of organisations across Scotland, we support making public transport free for all. But what we are saying is that the process must start with those who need it most. So the reason we chose this campaign out of sadly the very many campaigns you could run linking to poverty in Scotland is that as a member-led organisation, the Poverty Alliance works very closely with people with lived experiences of poverty, and our engagement over a very long period of time has consistently shown that the cost of transport, and particularly bus travel, is a priority issue for people living on low incomes and for communities across Scotland. So it comes at a time, it comes up time and time again when we ask people what measures could be taken to make their lives easier and to loosen the grip of poverty. So one of our campaign activists always talks about how she's disabled and she has her bus pass, but her children are her carers, and they have to, a large chunk of their money that they have to spend on food, and when they go, when they go for her shopping, because she has a disability, a large chunk of that money is taken up on bus travel. And campaigns like the Trussell Trust support the campaign, which I know is in large part due to the fact that so many people struggle to access cheaper food or even make their way to a food bank because they're unable to afford the cost of transport. And we know that, the best deals aren't always the ones that are around the corner. Often people, especially living on low incomes who don't have access to a car, have to travel to get cheaper food. So that's taken up a big chunk of their already stretched budgets. But when we're talking about access to transport in the context of food insecurity, the issue is so much wider than just directly accessing food. Access to bus travel is important for so many things: access to jobs and education, even going for interviews, accessing welfare rights and other essential services that people have the right to access. So it's really important for people to maximise their incomes. And especially now, as people have mentioned, with the cost of living crisis, every imaginable bill is going up. So it's really essential to remove as many financial barriers as possible to allow people the ability to find ways to maximise their incomes, and for which access to affordable bus travel is really essential. So for those living in poverty or in deprived communities, bus travel is an especially vital part of their lives. They are the most people living in deprived communities are the most likely to use bus journeys. I think it's important to note that 70% of public transport journeys come from buses, but people in deprived communities are the least able to afford the rising cost of bus travel, which has increased 18% between 2014 and 2019, and I'm sure will increase more, creating financial barriers to accessing vital opportunities and just generally participating in society. And it would also play a really important role in addressing child poverty, both reducing outgoings and by helping play a role in helping boost families' incomes. So whether in work or not, most low-income households with children would be entitled to some type of low-income supplement and therefore would qualify for free bus travel under the proposed policy. And research conducted by the Poverty Alliance recently highlights that transport can exert significant pressures on household budgets and limit the opportunities and options available. So for people seeking employment, the cost of transport was said to represent a major consideration when assessing possible employment options, with it limiting the scope of realistic and feasible options. So again, the policy could help both the alleviation of food insecurity, but also prevent it by playing a wider role in combating poverty. And again, with the current crisis, it's really essential that people can use all means necessary to guard against poverty. So that's the campaign in a nutshell. There's lots of other reasons why we should expand free bus travel, but I've tried to narrow it down as much as possible.
That's great. Thank you for that. So many questions. So please put your questions in the chat. As you can see, there's some beginning to come through now, but it'd be great to see some more. Vivian, can you tell us a little bit about the difference that you think free transport would make to people that you work with in Glasgow, and what's happening around the free travel for people that you work with who are in the middle of the asylum process? Why is that so important?
Absolutely, Jane. So we've been working with food insecurity since 2012. We, up until quite recently, well, up until last month, we ran a food bank. And we've just transformed that into a food hub. But transport has always been a big topic for the people we work with. And we noticed that because essentially, if we run an event, it will be more successful if we manage to pay people's travel expenses. And if we can't pay travel expenses, we have a lower attendance. So that's how we know that transport is a big topic for the people we work with. Diane said at the very beginning that insecure and insufficient income is the driver for food insecurity. And the two things that people we work with spend money on are food and travel. So asylum seekers live on just over £5 a day. And they often have to attend appointments such as lawyers' appointments or support agencies' appointments, health appointments. And if a bus ticket is £4.70, then it's pretty obvious if you have £5 a day, if you have to buy a bus ticket that day, you can't afford food. So that brings people into food banks that are meant to be an emergency provision on a regular basis. So I think that the ending the need to food bank consultation has really shown such a sincerity on the side of the Scottish Government. The document listed all the benefits they've introduced and all the ways in which they're trying to alleviate food insecurity. so I think we have to start out by saying that there's, such deep sincerity from the side of this, from the side of the Scottish Government. And I think, therefore, I feel quite confident in pointing out that this is one thing that the Scottish Government could do. It would be possible to give asylum seekers free bus travel. And it would basically mean that people can then spend the money on food instead of bus tickets.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we were focused on there, though, Vivian, is very much around bus transport. And I know you represent people across central and west of Scotland. Does this have to go beyond just bus travel? Thinking about where some of our resettlement communities are. We've got places like the Isle of Bute. Obviously, people have access to buses, that's one thing, but how can they more broadly benefit from better interaction in their communities through wider provision?
So I do think that the majority of asylum seekers are placed in Glasgow. I know that some are placed remotely, but I think that introducing free bus travel would be a very simple thing to do, and it would help a big chunk of the asylum seeking community in Scotland. Even though probably it's totally different for people in Bute. I understand that maybe there needs to be ferries considered or trains.
Yeah. So do you see this as a step change process then? Start with buses and see how we can progress things so that we've got better general access for more people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like also this is a bit like Mums in the Kitchen's got a cake and one of the children has seen it, and all the other kids come in and say, I want a slice, I want a slice. I really think that free bus travel should be for everyone on low income. And that's why I'm excited about Susie's campaign. And it shouldn't be that everybody tries to get a chunk individually. We should think of it like work on this together.
Definitely. Love the food related metaphor, Vivian. That's very welcome today. Susie, do you want to come in on that? And also Pete has got a question in the chat that's actually quite similar. He's asking about in areas where there really are no buses, is this about more than just access to the existing transport network? Do we need to make sure that the transport network is appropriate for people's needs?
Yeah, so I would echo what Vivian said. I think the Everyone Aboard campaign is part of a wider movement that's moving towards increased usage of public transport more generally. And it's not just about affordability, it's about reliability, accessibility and availability. These are all issues, and Everyone Aboard plays a humble part in trying to address the affordability aspect. I think when it comes to rural communities, obviously availability and accessibility is one of the biggest issues there, if not the biggest, I'm not sure. But again, that same point applies that, this is just one part of a greater issue. But I would say that people in rural communities pay a lot more for public transport when they do. So I think it was research from Citizens Advice Scotland found that the average bus ticket return ticket is £6, whereas in remote and rural areas it's £10.50. So there is a rural element to this campaign, and I think would help address poverty and inequality in rural areas, even though it's not about directly about the availability of bus services.
Absolutely. Thanks, Susie. Anecdotally, I got the bus to Glasgow the other day and it cost me £18.80. So I think that maybe just gives a feel for what some of those rural costs actually are, and how hard hitting that can be. Can you tell us a bit about what you think about the universal provision element of this versus targeted support, Susie?
Yes, I saw that. I just saw it briefly. Someone saying that. I think that's always an important consideration, and it's a debate that will always be ongoing: universal versus targeted. My feeling is that when it comes to poverty and inequality, very explicitly, targeted's always best. Well, not always. Like in the case of free school meals, I think universalism is important. But that's the point I want to make, is that I think when it comes to young people, there's a better case to be made for universalism. And I think in this case, you said it, Jane, we're trying to initiate a step change in how people get about. And I think starting with young people and making it universal is really important, not just for issues like poverty and inequality, but for the environment of creating this change that we need in society, which is a move towards public transport. So I think when it comes to young people, universalism is important. I also think a lot of young people slip through the net when it comes to poverty as well. and aren't always, receiving benefits. There's student poverty is a big issue. People at university don't get benefits. There's lots of people that can slip through the net who are young. So I think when it comes to young people, universalism is the way to go. But we obviously have a large part of the people who would benefit most if this campaign was implemented would be people on low incomes. It would affect a lot more people on low incomes. So I think we've got a nice balance. That's my feeling, between targeted and universal.
Yeah.
I used to, sorry.
Oh, you go. I was just going to bring you in there.
Because this ties in with a point that you made before, Susie. I used to not understand why the bus scheme for pensioners is not means tested. I used to not understand that until somebody pointed out to me that this is also about loneliness. So I think we need to, apart from thinking about food insecurity and in-household incomes, we also need to think about social aspects of travel and how having the ability to travel can encourage you to take part in society.
Yeah.
And this is a big topic as well for the asylum seeking community, because there's a lot of isolation and there's a lot of need to contribute skills that, transport can also enable that. So it's not just about the money, it's also about the general kind of well-being.
So on that point then, Vivian, about transport being an enabler for other things and other changes, is a bit like free school meals in that way, where investment in this can actually lead to a number of unintended benefits. How do you both think that this could help improve the access to work for people and improve quality of job opportunities for people? Do you think there's something in there around people then being able to earn more to offset the consequences of the cost of living crisis?
Well, I'll start on that one. Yeah, I think it will be huge. We've did, as I mentioned very briefly, the Poverty Alliance did research recently commissioned by Transport Scotland that found just that people do find their limits, that there's limitations placed on them in terms of the scope of feasible employment options when they have to account for transport costs. Often the best jobs are in Glasgow, and if you're where I am in South Lanarkshire or even further, you've got a hell of a bill on your hands if you have to travel in all the time. And I think this point's especially true for women. Women are more likely to use orbital bus routes, so they're on and off different buses throughout the day. They're balancing care and responsibilities and work and shopping and all these different domestic issues that tend to fall on the shoulders of women. And trying to balance work on top of that is already difficult, and especially when you're trying to balance that while trying to reduce all the costs associated with all those different tasks that you have to undertake. So, and again, there is that kind of technical aspect of, yes, women would find it easier, who are much more vulnerable to experiencing poverty anyway, to get to work, to expand their options in terms of work, but just psychologically to know that you can hop on a bus and it's not going to take a big chunk of your limited household budget is huge. These aren't things that we can account for or even measure if the policy was introduced, but I know that they would be huge. Just that knowledge that you can just jump on the bus is huge. So absolutely think it would help a lot with employment. And I think in terms of the young person aspect, young people have been hit hardest by the pandemic, by disruption to employment. They're already on lower pay, they already get lower benefits, but their costs are no lower. Obviously precarious work and unemployment fell to them the most. So I think in terms of getting back into education, which then increases their employment opportunities and having a wider scope of employment opportunities, I think is really important for young people too.
Lovely, thanks, Susie. Vivian, have you got anything to add to that?
Super interesting point, Susie. So, I mean, a lot of the people I work with are not entitled to work because they're in the asylum process. But I guess, just in short, that can transfer, the idea of work can transfer to any kind of means of contributing to society. We have a lot of people who are highly skilled and highly motivated and burning to share some of their skills. So, it can be that people can go to other community organizations that they can contribute to volunteering. So, in a similar way, this is about contributing and traveling in order to contribute to society. Definitely.
And that can go beyond, as you say, paid employment. Absolutely. I think all of us in the room know and recognise that. Well, thank you to you both. That's really helped kickstart some of the thinking, I think, that we'll move into in the discussion groups. And I can see there's a lot of comments in the chat, and hopefully we'll also be able to dig into it a little bit further. So I'll hand back to the Nourish team.
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. I was just saying thank you. Thank you for that interesting discussion. And now just a little bit behind time. So we're going to go back to our breakout rooms and again, discussing these questions around what are the benefits and challenges of universal versus targeted approaches, and how can we work together to support these calls, campaigns for extending free transport. So Diana, is your turn to take us back. So would you mind using Menti again to kind of like share with us like the key points or questions from the discussions earlier? Or any questions that you have? Why free transport is important?
Do you want me to read these out, Irina? Was that your idea?
You can take over.
The right to mobility is coming up there. I'm just trying to type and read at the same time. I can only see one just now on the screen. Let me see what else is coming up.
Yeah.
Right to mobility, I think that's an interesting concept. It could be yes, we had this as well. So the targeted approach needs flexibility. This is talking about the cutoff point where people can be just on the cusp of being eligible. Rural, yes, focus on the rural areas. I think we've all learned that today. And transport enabler. So it's not just about the money, it's also about the social side of things. Tool to support cultural change, that's interesting. Learning from other people's research. Interested in discussion of capping fares as a middle way to universal options. So another way that government could intervene here by capping fares, because we're talking about private transport companies. This is interesting. So a way of regulating that government could be involved in. Means testing, help those who are often forgotten. Access to all modes of transport. So this is again about the rural area where the bus just seems to cover the city. How do we connect the right to mobility and the right to food? Interesting. So can there be a joint mechanism here? Another way yet joined up thinking. Rural areas and maybe also food deserts within the cities need more focus. There's a lack of shops and I think a lack of choice. And I think that the transport comes in nicely there as a topic where that can make a difference. Reliability and regularity of public transport. So I think this is actually something we've not touched on upon at all, is that the transport companies are private and that the government could maybe step in there as a regulator.
Thanks so much for being